This video is for Kristen. I will try to tag her below. If you are not Kristen or Stephen King, you can keep scrolling. So, story time. I've been wanting to make this video for a very long time. The creator that I am going to try and tag down below is somebody. She was talking about how she's a Stephen King fan and she knows that Stephen King isn't on TikTok. But she was trying to remember the title of a Stephen King, I believe might have been short story or a book or something. She's like, I read it, and at the time it was only in like a certain magazine. So like she told the story about how she was trying to find the magazine and it was like a adult magazine, so she's embarrassed by it, and then everybody in the comments was saying that particular short story is in Skeleton Crew, his novel collection Skeleton Crew. After watching that video, I thought it was very funny, by the way. After watching that video, I realized I had a very similar story when it comes to Stephen King novels. I'm a big Stephen King fan. I've read a decent amount of Stephen King books, but nowhere near all of his books. And there is one story that I cannot get out of my head that I would love to reread, but I have no idea what it was called, and this is the story behind that. So I've always been a big reader. Anything that sounds interesting to me, I will read and love and talk about to anybody else who will listen. Always been a big reader. And I knew when I was in high school, I eventually wanted to read some Stephen King. However, at the time, I was a little bit more apprehensive on the kind of scary stuff, like psychological thrillers and things like that. And I knew that's what Stephen King was famous for, so I was apprehensive on stepping in to reading a Stephen King novel. Fast forward to my junior year in high school, I'm taking a creative writing class that I am absolutely loving. And my teacher at the time, I wish I could remember her name, she was a wonderful teacher. My teacher loved Stephen King. So we took two classes at one time, and we took the span of two classes to read a short story of his because she wanted to make an example of his writing style, his prose, and things like that in the unit of writing that we were learning about. And it was a really good story, so let me just try to remember, because again, I was 17 in my junior year of high school. It's been a while. I'm 30 now. But the basic idea of the story, we took the span of two classes to read this story. She read it aloud to us. It was a short story about a man who his wife had been murdered. He was a school teacher. His wife had been murdered, and he knew who did it. I don't remember how he knew it. I don't know if he witnessed the murder or had found evidence that police had overlooked. I don't remember how he knew, but he knew for a fact that his neighbor had murdered his wife, and the justice system wasn't doing anything about it. The evidence was circumstantial and he wasn't getting arrested. So obviously the man was furious and he wanted revenge on the man that murdered his wife. He knew he wasn't physically strong enough really to take on this man, this murderer. So he takes a summer job once school is out. He takes a summer job at a construction site so that he then becomes more physically fit by the end of the summer. And that way he feels that he has a better chance on taking on this murderer. Fast forward some details that I'm probably not remembering, but how the story ends is that he digs a giant hole, somehow lures the murderer to drive into the hole. I don't remember I don't remember if he like covered it up and made it like a booby trap or whatever. He lures the murderer to drive into the hole, and then he buries the murderer alive. At this point in the story, you're rooting for the main character. You're like, the justice system wasn't doing its job, so he took matters into his own hands. He knew that this guy was the killer of his wife, and he wanted revenge. So I remember the story literally describing how he could hear the man yelling, and then more and more dirt he put on the car, less and less he could hear. And then the man was buried alive in his car in the middle of the desert, I think. And so like we discussed how authors could make you root for morally gray people. We discussed why we felt that way, like how Stephen King had written the character in a way that made you root for somebody who is doing something like murder. Anyway, I just remember really, really liking the story and being impressed by it, and it was technically my first Stephen King read, but I don't remember the title of it for the life of me, and I would love to reread it. And it had to be a short story because, again, took 2 classes to read it, and I wish I could be like, it was this story and it's in this short story collection of Stephen King's, but I have no memory of what the title was. Considering all the details, I remember, 13 years later, you would think I would remember the title, but I guess my brain didn't think to remember that detail. So if you are a Stephen King fan and that book sounds familiar to you, please tell me what it is. I would love to reread it. I would love to know what short story book it is. Please tell me. I will try to tag the original creator because her story made me laugh and reminded me of my own Stephen King story.